All right, today we're diving into a real puzzle. It's a story of incredible economic ambition clashing with a really stubborn, persistent problem. So let's get right into it. So here's the big question we're wrestling with today. On one hand, you have India projected to be the world's fastest growing major economy. I mean, a true powerhouse. But on the other hand, when you look at how people perceive corruption there, the country seems to be kind of stuck in neutral. How is that even possible? And this right here really lays out the paradox perfectly. You've got this incredible economic engine roaring ahead, and then you have a global ranking for corruption that puts India in the bottom half of all nations. These two things just don't seem to add up, and that's what we're going to unpack. So that brings us to our first big idea here, this tale of two Indias. One India is speeding into the future, economically speaking, while the other seems caught in this loop of old governance challenges. Okay, let's talk numbers. The number to focus on is 39. That's India's score, out of 100, on the latest Corruption Perceptions Index. Now, this index basically asks experts and business folks how corrupt they think a country's public sector is. And just so you know, anything under 50 is seen as a pretty serious problem. But what's really wild is that this number has barely moved in more than a decade, even while the economy was taking off. But you know, it's really important to get some perspective here. This isn't just an India story. We need to zoom out a bit and look at this in a global context because honestly, the bigger picture is a little troubling. Well, it turns out the global average score has actually dropped, landing at just 42. What that tells us is that this is a worldwide trend. It looks like corruption is actually getting worse in many places, weakening institutions and making people lose trust in them pretty much everywhere. And take a look at this. It really shows you just how lopsided things are. The number of countries with high scores, the ones with really strong integrity, that's a shrinking club. Meanwhile, the vast majority of nations, India included, are stuck in those lower scoring groups. It feels like a global step backward on accountability. Okay, so with that global picture in mind, what does this actually mean for India? Why should any of us care about these perception scores? Well, because they're not just abstract numbers on a chart. They have a very real, very tangible cost, which is what we're going to get into now. And this is exactly why these perceptions matter so much. A low score on this index is like a giant red flag for international investors. It signals that accountability might be weak, that the business environment could be unstable, and that directly hits a country's ability to compete and attract the money it needs to grow. When you bring it back to India, the economic hit is just staggering. Some estimates suggest that corruption, both directly and indirectly, shaves off about 1.5% of the country's entire GDP. I mean, think about that. That is a huge amount of lost potential, year after year after year. So what does 1.5% of GDP even look like in the real world? Well, it's the money that could have built new roads and hospitals. It's funding that could have gone into better schools. It's the capital that could have fueled new businesses and big ideas. That's the real human cost of this governance gap. So you gotta ask, right? What's really driving this? What's the root cause that's keeping that score so low? Well, a huge part of the answer seems to be a system that is just buried in bureaucracy. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an entrepreneur for a second. Imagine trying to start a business when you're facing literally thousands of complex laws. Officials often have a ton of personal discretion, and you could even face criminal charges for minor slip-ups. In a system like that, a lot of people feel like they have no choice but to use informal methods just to get by. And here's the real kicker. The whole system is supposed to make sure people follow the rules, but all this complexity, it often does the exact opposite. It creates uncertainty, it drives up costs, and it ultimately makes it harder to do business. And you know, this complexity isn't always an accident. It also concentrates power, which makes the system incredibly difficult to change. But it's not all doom and gloom. The story doesn't end there. There's a really powerful counter-movement picking up steam, and it's all being driven by technology. This is the digital fight back. Yeah, this quote really nails it. When you digitize processes, you take a lot of the decision-making out of the hands of a single official. You create a clear digital trail that you can follow, and that just shrinks the number of opportunities for corruption to happen in the first place. And this isn't just theory, right? We're already seeing it work in practice. Things like direct benefit transfers for welfare payments cut down on waste by sending money straight to people's accounts. The boom in digital payments is making more of the economy official and traceable. And the GST network, which is this huge digital tax platform, has made the whole system more transparent. These are real wins. Now, look, digital tools aren't a magic bullet, of course. You always have to watch out for new kinds of fraud, but they are a massive step in the right direction. So all of this, it brings India to this really critical moment, a crossroads, where its enormous ambition is coming face to face with the hard reality of its governance challenges. And this right here is the fundamental tug of war. The goal is to build a $10 trillion economy, an incredible ambition. But the big hurdle standing in the way is this nagging governance deficit. If you don't fix the foundations, reaching that kind of economic height becomes so much harder.
So what's the playbook from here? What's the path forward? Well, it's not about one magic policy. It's about a long-term, sustained push for reform on all fronts, making the courts faster and more efficient, making policymaking more transparent, protecting the independence of key institutions, and, maybe most importantly, simplifying that bureaucratic maze we were just talking about.
And that leaves us with the one big final question. India's economic rise is happening. That's not in doubt. But the real test will be whether the country can reform its own rules and institutions to match the scale of its ambition. The answer to that question will really define its future.